Summary and analysis of Romeo and Juliet. Few stories have stayed alive for so many years the way Romeo and Juliet has. Written by William Shakespeare more than 400 years ago, this play is still read, watched, acted, discussed, and loved all over the world. Even people who have never read the play know the name Romeo and Juliet. Their love story has become a symbol of young love, deep passion, and tragic fate. But Romeo and Juliet is not just a simple love story. It is a story about two rich families in the city of Verona who hate each other so much that even their servants fight in the streets. Nobody clearly remembers how the hate began. In the prologue, Shakespeare talks about an ancient grudge. Still, it continues. In the middle of this anger and pride, two teenagers meet by chance. Romeo is a Montague, Juliet is a Capulet. They are supposed to stay away from each other. Instead, they fall deeply in love. That is where the trouble begins. What makes this play so famous is not only the romance and tragedy. Shakespeare mixes love, danger, friendship, family, pressure, revenge, and death into one story. One moment the play feels warm and funny, the next moment everything changes. A joke turns into a fight, a happy meeting turns into sorrow. Shakespeare keeps reminding us how quickly life can change. The play also speaks to something very human. Young people often want freedom. Families often want control. People act in anger without thinking of the result. Pride destroys peace. Love tries to survive in the middle of all this. Throughout the story, Shakespeare gives us lines that readers still remember today. My only love sprung from my only hate. In simple words, the person I love has come from the family I'm supposed to hate. In this summary and analysis, we will go through the story step by step in very simple language so that you can clearly understand what happens, why the characters act the way they do, and why this tragic play still touches people even today. Summary of Romeo and Juliet. To make Romeo and Juliet easier to understand, I'm going to explain the story act by act. Shakespeare wrote the play in 5 acts, and each act changes the mood of the story. In the beginning, the play feels young, exciting, and full of love. Slowly, it becomes darker and more painful. By dividing the story into acts, we can clearly see how one small decision leads to another until the tragedy becomes unavoidable. I may pronounce some names wrong, but please excuse me for that. Characters in Act 1. Romeo, a young Montague, emotional and romantic. Juliet, a young Capulet girl. Benvolio, Romeo's cousin and friend. Mercutio, Romeo's witty friend. Tybalt, Juliet's hot-tempered cousin. Lord Capulet, Juliet's father. Lady Capulet, Juliet's mother. Lord Montague, Romeo's father. Prince Aeschylus, the ruler of Verona. Paris, a noble who wants to marry Juliet. Nurse, Juliet's caretaker. Friar Lawrence, a priest and friend to Romeo. Act 1 of Summary of Romeo and Juliet. The play opens in the city of Verona. Right from the beginning, Shakespeare throws us into conflict. Servants from the Montague and Capulet families meet in the street and begin insulting each other. The insults quickly turn into fight. Soon more people join. Benvolio enters and tries to stop the violence because he wants peace. Who is Benvolio? Benvolio is Romeo's cousin and friend. But then Tybalt arrives. Who is Tybalt? Tybalt is Juliet's hot-tempered cousin. Tybalt is the opposite of Benvolio. He loves fighting and becomes angry even at the idea of peace. When Benvolio tries to calm things down, Tybalt says, "What? Drawn and talk of peace? I hate the word." It means, you have pulled out your sword and now you're talking about peace? I hate even the word peace. The fight grows bigger and begins pulling more people into it. Finally, Prince Aeschylus arrives and stops the chaos. He becomes furious and warns both families that if they disturb the peace again, they may lose their lives. Who is Prince Aeschylus? Prince Aeschylus is the ruler of Verona, the city the city where Romeo and Juliet takes place. After all this noise and anger, Shakespeare suddenly changes the mood. We meet Romeo. He is not thinking about fighting at all. He is sad because he is in love with a girl named Rosalind, but she does not love him back. Romeo acts as if his world is ending. Benvolio listens to him and gently tells him to stop staring at one girl and look at others. Meanwhile, Paris visits Lord Capulet and asks for Juliet's hand in marriage. Capulet says Juliet is still young and should wait, but he invites Paris to a party at his house. Who is Paris? Paris is a young nobleman in Verona who wants to marry Juliet. He is wealthy, respected, and approved by Juliet's parents, especially Lord Capulet. Lord Capulet is Juliet's father. By chance, Romeo hears about the party. Benvolio tells him to go there because he may meet someone prettier than Rosalind. Romeo goes to the party with his friends. Tybalt notices Romeo and becomes angry because a Montague has entered a Capulet gathering. He wants to fight, but Lord Capulet stops him. Then Romeo sees Juliet. Suddenly, Rosalind disappears from his mind. It feels almost unreal. Juliet also feels attracted to Romeo. They talk, and Shakespeare compares their meeting to something holy and pure. But happiness lasts only a moment. When the party ends, Romeo learns Juliet belongs to Capulet family. Juliet belongs to the Capulet family. Juliet discovers Romeo is a Montague. This is where Act 1 ends. Act 1 begins with swords and anger, but ends with love. Shakespeare plants Shakespeare plants a question in our minds. Can love survive when hate already controls everything around it? Characters in Act 2: Romeo, Juliet, Mercutio, Benvolio, Nurse, Friar Lawrence. Act 2 Summary of Romeo and Juliet. Act 2 begins right after the Capulet party. Romeo cannot stop thinking about Juliet. While his friends return home, Romeo secretly climbs over the Capulet garden wall because his heart pulls him back toward her. Mercutio and Benvolio search for him and call his name. Mercutio jokes about Romeo still being in love with Rosalind, but he has no idea that Romeo's feelings have already changed completely. Who is Mercutio? Mercutio is Romeo's close friend and one of the most lively characters in Romeo and Juliet. He is clever, funny, entertaining, and loves making jokes. Many of the lighter and more entertaining moments in the play come from Mercutio. Soon Romeo sees Juliet standing at her window. This becomes one of the most famous scenes in literature, known as the balcony scene. Romeo quietly watches while Juliet speaks her thoughts, believing she is alone. She is worried and confused because she has fallen in love with Romeo, but Romeo belongs to the Montague family. She says, "Oh Romeo, Romeo, wherefore art thou Romeo?" She is not asking where Romeo is. She is asking why he had to be born into the family she is supposed to hate. Romeo steps out and speaks to her. The two openly confess their love. Juliet worries that everything is happening too quickly, but she also knows that her feelings are real. Before parting, they decide that if their love is true, they should marry. The next morning, Romeo goes to Friar Lawrence and asks for help. The friar is shocked. Only yesterday, Romeo was heartbroken over Rosalind, and now he is talking about marriage. He warns Romeo not to rush because strong emotions can sometimes lead people into trouble. In case you are wondering who a friar is a priest like figure. He gives advice, performs marriages, listens to people's problems, and tries to guide them. Unlike other religious people, a friar does not stay isolated in a church or a monastery. He normally lives among people. After listening to the impulsive desire of Romeo, Friar Lawrence says, "These violent delights have violent ends." Still, Friar Lawrence agrees to help. He hopes that the marriage may finally end the hatred between the Montague and Capulet families. Later, Romeo meets Juliet's nurse and asks her to secretly take a message to Juliet. The nurse enjoys teasing Juliet and takes her time before giving the news. Juliet grows impatient and nervous. Finally, the nurse tells her that Romeo is waiting at Friar Lawrence's place. Juliet secretly goes there. Away from the eyes of both families, Romeo and Juliet are married and become husband and wife. Shakespeare does not spend much time on the ceremony itself. The important thing for him is not the wedding, but the choice they make and what that choice will bring later. This is where Act 2 ends. Act 2 feels warm and hopeful. For a short time, love seems stronger than hate. Romeo and Juliet believe they have found a way around the problem standing between them. But Shakespeare also leaves a shadow over their happiness. Everything is moving very fast. A few days earlier, Romeo loved Rosalind. Now he has secretly married Juliet. Love has given them hope. Time will test that hope. Characters in Act 3: Romeo, Juliet, Mercutio, Benvolio, Tybalt, Nurse, Friar Lawrence, Prince Aeschylus, Lord Capulet, Lady Capulet, Paris. Act 3 Summary of Romeo and Juliet. Act 3 is the turning point of the whole play. Until now, love had been moving the story forward. Romeo and Juliet had secretly married and believed that they had found a way around the hatred between their families. But in this act, things begin to fall apart very quickly. The act opens on the streets of Verona. Benvolio feels uneasy and says that trouble may come because the weather is hot and people become angry more easily. Who is Benvolio? Benvolio is Romeo's cousin and one of his closest friends. He is one of the calmest and most reasonable characters in the play. Soon Tybalt arrives with his friends. He is still furious that Romeo entered the Capulet party. Then Romeo appears. Tybalt immediately insults him and challenges him to fight. Everyone expects Romeo to react, but Romeo refuses. Unknown to everyone else, Romeo is now secretly married to Juliet. Tybalt is now connected to him through marriage, and Romeo does not want to hurt him. But Mercutio does not know this. Mercutio thinks Romeo is behaving like a coward. Proud and angry, he decides to fight Tybalt himself. Romeo tries to stop them. He rushes between the two men, hoping to end the fight. Then disaster strikes. Tybalt's sword slips under Romeo's arm and wounds Mercutio. At first, Mercutio jokes about his injury, but slowly the truth becomes clear. The wound is serious. Before dying, he says, "A plague of both your houses." Mercutio is blaming both families. Their hatred has now taken the life of someone who was not even part of the family feud. Romeo is shattered. A few moments ago he wanted peace, but now guilt and anger take control of him. He blames himself for Mercutio's death. Filled with rage, he fights Tybalt and kills him. Everything changes in a few seconds. Prince Aeschylus arrives and gives his judgment. Romeo escapes death because Tybalt killed Mercutio first. Instead, Romeo is banished from Verona forever. To Romeo, this feels worse than death. Meanwhile, Juliet waits excitedly for evening because she hopes to spend time with Romeo after their marriage. The nurse arrives crying and confused. At first, Juliet thinks Romeo has died. Then she learns that Tybalt is dead and Romeo has been banished. For a moment, Juliet feels torn apart. Tybalt was her cousin, but Romeo is now her husband. Her heart is pulled in two directions, but finally, love wins and she chooses to stand beside Romeo. Later, Romeo hides with Friar Lawrence. Romeo cries and behaves as if life has ended. Friar Lawrence becomes frustrated and scolds him for losing hope so quickly. He tells Romeo that things are bad but not hopeless. At the same time, another problem appears. Lord Capulet suddenly decides that Juliet should marry Paris in a few days. This is where Act 3 ends. Act 3 begins with anger and ends with fear. Shakespeare shows how one moment of uncontrolled emotion can destroy many lives. Up to this point, the story felt like a love story. Now it begins to feel like a tragedy. Characters in Act 4: Juliet, Romeo, Friar Lawrence, Paris, Nurse, Lord Capulet, Lady Capulet. Act 4 Summary of Romeo and Juliet. Act 4 begins with Juliet standing at one of the hardest points in her life. Everything around her seems to be moving against her. Romeo has been banished from Verona. Her parents want her to marry Paris. Time is running out, and she feels completely trapped. Juliet goes to Friar Lawrence looking for help. When she arrives, Paris is already there, speaking happily about his coming marriage. He believes Juliet is simply sad because of Tybalt's death and does not know that she is secretly married to Romeo. Juliet answers him carefully, but inside she is full of fear and pain. After Paris leaves, Juliet can no longer hide her feelings. She breaks down in front of Friar Lawrence. She tells him that she cannot marry Paris because Romeo is already her husband. She is so desperate that she even takes out a knife and says she would rather die than betray Romeo. Friar Lawrence realizes the situation is becoming dangerous. He creates a risky plan. He gives Juliet a sleeping potion and explains everything carefully. He tells her to go home and agree to marry Paris. On the night before the wedding, she must drink the potion. The drink will make her body look lifeless. Her skin will grow cold, her pulse will become weak, and everyone will believe she has died. Then she will be placed in the Capulet family tomb. At first, the plan sounds frightening. Imagine hearing someone tell you to pretend to die and allow your family to bury you. Still, Juliet has no other choice. Friar Lawrence also promises that he will send a letter to Romeo explaining the entire plan. Romeo will come back secretly and wait for Juliet to wake up. Then the two can leave Verona together. Juliet returns home and suddenly acts like a different person. She apologizes to her father and tells him she will obey him and marry Paris. Lord Capulet becomes overjoyed. He is so happy that he even moves the wedding to an earlier day. Without knowing it, he makes the situation even more dangerous because there is now even less time. The house becomes busy with wedding preparations. People are moving around, talking, cooking, and preparing for celebration. But Juliet carries a terrible secret inside her. Late at night, she sits alone holding the bottle of potion. Now fear enters her mind. What if Friar Lawrence has lied to her? What if the potion is poison? What if she wakes up too early? Even worse, what if she wakes up inside the dark tomb surrounded by dead bodies? For a moment, she almost loses courage. But then she thinks of Romeo. She drinks the potion and says, Romeo, 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 here is drink. I drink to thee. Then she falls unconscious onto her bed. This is where Act 4 ends. Act 4 is not filled with sword fights, but it creates a different kind of fear. Shakespeare slowly builds tension. Every scene feels like a rope being pulled tighter and tighter. In the earlier acts, Romeo often rushed into danger without thinking. Here, Juliet becomes the stronger one. She accepts a terrifying plan and risks her life for love. The story now feels like a clock moving toward midnight. Something big is coming, and we can almost feel it getting closer. Characters in Act 5: Romeo, Juliet, Friar Lawrence, Paris, Nurse, Prince Aeschylus, Lord Capulet, Lord Montague, Balthasar, Romeo's servant. Act 5 summary of Romeo and Juliet. Act 5 begins with Romeo staying away from Verona after being banished. Even though he is far away, he still hopes that things will become better. Then suddenly everything falls apart because of one mistake. Romeo's servant Balthasar arrives with shocking news. He tells Romeo that Juliet is dead and has been placed in the Capulet family tomb. Romeo is completely broken. The worst part is that Balthasar does not know the truth. He only saw what everyone else saw. Juliet looked dead, so naturally he believed she had died. At the same time, Friar Lawrence's message explaining the plan never reaches Romeo. Friar Lawrence gives the letter to Friar John and asks him to deliver the letter to Romeo, who is living in Mantua. But a rumor spreads that the house Friar John had visited before coming to the town had a dangerous disease, so the town officials refused to open the gate. This small event changes everything. The letter by Friar Lawrence is never delivered to Romeo. Shakespeare shows how sometimes lives can change because of one small thing that seems unimportant. Romeo cannot imagine living without Juliet. He decides to return to Verona one last time. Before leaving, he buys poison from a poor apothecary, even though selling poison is against the law. In the olden days, an apothecary used to sell medicine and work as a pharmacist. Romeo says, well, Juliet, I will lie with thee tonight. He is no longer speaking like someone making plans for the future. He has already made his final decision. Meanwhile, Paris has gone to Juliet's tomb to place flowers there because he truly cared for her. When Romeo arrives, Paris thinks Romeo has come to insult the Capulet family. The two men fight. Romeo kills Paris. Then Romeo enters the tomb and finally sees Juliet lying there. Shakespeare creates a painful moment here because the audience knows something Romeo does not know. Juliet is not dead. She is only sleeping because of Friar Lawrence's plan. Romeo looks at Juliet one last time, drinks the poison, kisses her, and dies beside her. Only a few moments later, Juliet wakes up. Friar Lawrence reaches the tomb and sees what has happened. He begs Juliet to leave quickly, but Juliet refuses. When she sees Romeo dead beside her, her world collapses. She takes Romeo's dagger and kills herself. Soon people begin gathering at the tomb. The truth finally comes out. Friar Lawrence explains everything, including the secret marriage and the plan. The two families stand before the bodies of Romeo and Juliet. Now, after years of hatred, anger, and violence, they finally understand what their feud has cost them. The Montagues and Capulets decide to end their hatred and make peace. The play closes with Prince Aeschylus saying, for never was a story of more woe than this of Juliet and Romeo, and her Romeo. Act 5 is heartbreaking because nobody truly wanted this end. Romeo and Juliet did not die because they stopped loving each other. They died because hate, anger, rushed decision, and terrible timing surrounded them from every side. The saddest part of the story is this: peace finally arrives, but it comes too late. Act 5 is the final act. The main theme and analysis of Romeo and Juliet. Romeo and Juliet is both a romance and a tragedy, but Shakespeare finally treats it as a tragedy. At the beginning, it looks like a love story. Two young people meet, fall in love, speak beautiful words to each other, and secretly marry. Many moments feel warm and hopeful. If someone watches only the first part of the play, he may think it is simply a romantic story. But Shakespeare gives a warning right at the beginning. In the prologue, he calls Romeo and Juliet a pair of star-crossed lovers. The words star-crossed suggest people whose fate is working against them. As the story moves forward, the mood slowly changes. Act 1, love begins. Act 2, love grows and brings hope. Act 3, violence changes everything. Act 4, fear and desperation take over. Act 5, tragedy arrives. So Shakespeare almost tricks the audience a little. He starts with romance and slowly turns into tragedy. You could say romance is the heart of the story, but tragedy is its final destination. It is also more than just romance and tragedy. The play touches many ideas: love versus hate, fate versus personal choice, youth versus family control, anger and revenge, the danger of rushed decisions. This is one reason the play has survived for hundreds of years. Different people can see different things in it. Some see a love story, some see a family conflict, some see a story about fate, some see a warning about acting too quickly. Shakespeare gave us all of them together. After finishing the story of Romeo and Juliet, we can now move from the events themselves and begin looking at the deeper ideas hidden inside the story, inside the play. During the play, we followed Romeo and Juliet as they met, fell in love, secretly married, and finally lost their lives. But Shakespeare was not simply telling the audience about two young people in love. Under the romance and tragedy, he placed many questions about life and human behavior. Why do people make choices that hurt them? How much control do we really have over our lives? Can love survive when anger and hatred are stronger? Why do people continue making quick decisions even when danger is standing right in front of them? Shakespeare does not directly give answers to these questions. Instead, he allows the audience to think and decide for themselves. Fate versus free will. One of the biggest questions in the play is whether Romeo and Juliet died because fate had already decided their future, or whether their own choices created the tragedy. Shakespeare gives hints about fate from the very beginning. In the prologue, he calls Romeo and Juliet a pair of star-crossed lovers. The phrase suggests that the stars themselves are working against them. Throughout the play, strange events continue appearing, such as Romeo does not receive Friar Lawrence's letter. Romeo reaches Juliet's tomb only moments before she wakes up. Small events keep pushing the story toward disaster. But fate alone does not explain everything. Characters also make choices. Romeo acts quickly many times. Tybalt lets anger guide him. Friar Lawrence creates a risky and reckless plan. Shakespeare leaves us with an interesting question. Perhaps fate opened the door, but people themselves walked through it. Love versus hate. Love and hate stand opposite each other throughout the play. The story begins with servants fighting in the streets and ends with Romeo and Juliet dying because of the hatred between their families. Romeo and Juliet represent love, while the feud between the Montagues and Capulets represent hate. What makes the story painful is that love itself is not shown as weak. Romeo risks his safety for Juliet. Juliet risks her life for Romeo. Their feelings remain strong until the very end. But the hatred surrounding them becomes stronger than the world they are trying to build together. Shakespeare almost places two forces against each other and asks which one will survive. The danger of acting too quickly. Many important decisions in the play happen in a very short time. Romeo quickly forgets Rosalind and falls in love with Juliet. Romeo and Juliet secretly marry after a short time. Romeo kills Tybalt in anger. Romeo drinks poison without checking whether Juliet is truly dead. Strong emotions often control actions in the play. People speak quickly, decide quickly, and act quickly. Shakespeare may be suggesting that emotions are powerful, but when people stop thinking carefully, emotions can also become dangerous. Young people versus family control. Another important idea in the play is the struggle between young people and family expectations. Romeo and Juliet want to choose their own path, but the people around them already have plans for them. Juliet faces the problem more strongly. Her father decides whom she should marry without asking what she wants. She feels trapped between obedience to her family and loyalty to Romeo. Shakespeare shows how difficult life can become when personal desires and family demands begin pulling people in different directions. Character analysis. Shakespeare gives each major character a different personality and purpose. Romeo is emotional and acts through feelings. He loves deeply, but he often acts before thinking. Juliet begins Juliet begins as a quiet and obedient girl, but slowly becomes stronger and more determined. By the end of the play, she shows great courage. Friar Lawrence wants peace and tries to help, but some of his decisions create bigger problems. Mercutio brings humor and energy into the story, but his pride and quick temper also create trouble. Tybalt represents anger, pride, and violence. No single character creates the tragedy alone. Different actions and personalities slowly build toward the ending. Symbols in the play. Shakespeare repeatedly uses symbols to give deeper meaning to the story. He uses light and darkness, stars and fate, poison and medicine, night and day. Romeo often compares Juliet to light. She almost becomes a bright object in a world filled with conflict and sadness. Poison and medicine also appear in interesting ways. Friar Lawrence works with healing plants and medicines, but poison later becomes the cause of death. Shakespeare seems to suggest that the same thing can heal or destroy depending on how it is used. Why is Romeo and Juliet still relevant today? Even though Romeo and Juliet was written hundreds of years ago, many parts of it still feel familiar. People still experience family pressure, young love, anger and conflict, miscommunication, and quick decisions made during emotional moments. The world around us has changed, but human emotions have changed very little. That is why people still continue reading, discussing, and thinking about Romeo and Juliet. It is not only a story about two people, it is also a story about human nature itself. Important characters in Romeo and Juliet. Romeo. Romeo is the male lead of the play and belongs to the Montague family. He is emotional, passionate, and often acts according to his feelings rather than logic. In the beginning of the play, Romeo is heartbroken because Rosalind does not love him. Then very quickly he falls deeply in love with Juliet. Romeo is caring and sincere, but he also acts impulsively. His quick decisions, such as killing Tybalt and later drinking poison without checking the truth, become important lessons for the tragedy. Shakespeare uses Romeo to show how powerful emotions can sometimes cloud judgment. Juliet. Juliet is the female lead of the play and belongs to the Capulet family. At first, she appears quiet, young, and obedient to her parents. As the story moves forward, however, she changes greatly. She becomes stronger, more confident, and willing to take risks for love. Juliet is more practical and thoughtful than Romeo in many situations. By the later parts of the play, she shows great courage by accepting Friar Lawrence's dangerous plan. Shakespeare uses Juliet to show personal growth and determination. Friar Lawrence. Friar Lawrence is a priest and a trusted guide for Romeo. He tries to help Romeo and Juliet because he believes their marriage may end the hatred between the two families. He is wise and caring, but some of his decisions are risky. His plan involving Juliet's sleeping potion becomes one of the biggest turning points in the play. Friar Lawrence represents good intentions, but Shakespeare also shows that good intentions alone do not always bring good results. Mercutio. Mercutio is Romeo's close friend and one of the most lively characters in the play. He is funny, clever, energetic, and often jokes with others. He brings humor into many scenes, but he also has proud and reckless side. His decision to fight Tybalt changes the entire direction of the story. After his death, the play becomes darker. Mercutio acts almost like a bridge between the lighter and tragic parts of the play. Tybalt. Tybalt is Juliet's cousin and represents anger and pride. He is quick-tempered and always ready for conflict. Tybalt hates the Montagues deeply and cannot tolerate Romeo entering the Capulet party. He desires for revenge and fighting leads to Mercutio's death, later his own death. Shakespeare uses Tybalt to show how uncontrolled anger can destroy lives. Benvolio. Benvolio is Romeo's cousin and one of the calmest people in the play. Unlike Tybalt, he tries to avoid fights and bring peace whenever possible. He comforts Romeo when Romeo is sad about Rosalind and repeatedly tries to stop violence. Benvolio represents reason and balance in a story filled with emotional decisions. Nurse. The nurse takes care of Juliet and is one of the people closest to her. She speaks openly, jokes often, and loves Juliet deeply. She helps Romeo and Juliet meet and support their secret marriage in the beginning. Later, however, the nurse advises Juliet to marry Paris after Romeo is banished. This hurts Juliet deeply. The nurse represents care and affection, but also practical thinking. Paris. Paris is a nobleman who wishes to marry Juliet. He is respectful and genuinely cares for her. He is not shown as a bad person. The problem is that Juliet is already secretly married to Romeo. Paris unknowingly becomes part of the conflict and later dies at Juliet's tomb. Shakespeare uses Paris to show how people can suffer even when they have done nothing wrong. Lord Capulet. Lord Capulet is Juliet's father. In the beginning, he appears caring and says Juliet is still young for marriage, but later he becomes strict and controlling. He expects Juliet to obey him completely and becomes furious when she refuses to marry Paris. His actions increase Juliet's sense of fear and pressure. Lady Capulet. Lady Capulet is Juliet's mother. She does not share a very close relationship with Juliet because the nurse raised Juliet for most of her childhood. Lady Capulet supports the marriage with Paris and follows the family's expectations. Her role shows the distance that sometimes exists between parents and children. Prince Aeschylus. Prince Aeschylus is the ruler of Verona and tries to keep peace in the city. He repeatedly wants the Montague and Capulet families to stop fighting. He represents law, order, and justice. Sadly, people listen only after the tragedy has already happened. Lord Montague. Lord Montague is Romeo's father and one of the heads of the Montague family. His role is smaller compared to Lord Capulet, but he is still important because he is part of the family feud that creates the tragedy. Shakespeare uses him to show how old conflict between families can affect younger generations who have no role in creating those conflicts. Important questions about Romeo and Juliet. Is fate or free will more responsible for the tragedy of Romeo and Juliet? Shakespeare introduces Romeo and Juliet as star-crossed lovers right at the beginning of the play. This suggests the fate already has a plan for them and that their future may be moving toward sadness. Throughout the story, strange events happen that seem beyond human control. Romeo does not receive Friar Lawrence's letter. Romeo arrives at Juliet's tomb only moments before she wakes up. Small events continue pushing the story toward disaster. But fate alone cannot explain everything. The characters also make many choices. Romeo quickly marries Juliet, kills Tybalt in anger, and later drinks poison without checking the truth. Friar Lawrence creates a risky plan, and Tybalt allows anger to guide him. Shakespeare does not give a simple answer. He seems to suggest that faith and personal choices work together. Fate may create situations, but people still decide how to respond. Explain the theme of love versus hate in Romeo and Juliet. Love and hate stand against each other throughout the play. The story begins with servants fighting in the streets because of the old hatred between the Montague and Capulet families. In the middle of this anger, Romeo and Juliet meet and fall in love. Their love appears gentle and pure compared to the violence around them. The tragedy comes because these two forces cannot live peacefully together. Romeo and Juliet try to build a world based on love, but family hatred keeps entering their lives. Tybalt's anger leads to Mercutio's death, Romeo's banishment, and finally, the deaths of Romeo and Juliet themselves. Shakespeare shows that hatred does not hurt only enemies, it can also destroy innocent people. Is Romeo a tragic hero? Explain with examples. Romeo can be a tragic hero because he has good qualities, but also serious weaknesses that contribute to his downfall. He is loving, loyal, sincere, and willing to sacrifice himself for people he cares about. He truly loves Juliet and remains devoted to her until the end of his life. At the same time, Romeo has an important weakness. He is impulsive and often acts according to emotions instead of reason. He quickly moves from Rosalind to Juliet, kills Tybalt in anger, and later drinks poison without trying to learn the complete truth. These decisions slowly lead him toward tragedy. Shakespeare shows that even good people can suffer when strong emotions take control. Describe Juliet's character development throughout the play. At the beginning of the play, Juliet appears quiet, young, and obedient. She listens to her parents and does not openly challenge them. When marriage with Paris is discussed, she calmly says she will think about it and respect her parents' wishes. She initially seems like someone who follows the decisions made by others. As the story moves forward, Juliet changes greatly. After meeting Romeo, she begins making important decisions for herself. She secretly marries him, by stands by him even after Tybalt's death, and later accepts Friar Lawrence's dangerous plan. By the end of the play, Juliet becomes brave and determined. Shakespeare uses Juliet to show how difficult situations can force a person to grow stronger. What role does Friar Lawrence play in the tragedy? Friar Lawrence is one of the few adults in the play who truly wants peace. He cares about Romeo and Juliet and believes their marriage might end the hatred between the Montague and Capulet families. Friar Lawrence helps them because he hopes something good will come out of their love. Throughout the story, he gives advice and tries to guide them during difficult situations. However, some of his decisions become part of the tragedy. He agrees to perform a secret marriage, creates a dangerous sleeping potion plan, and depends on a letter reaching Romeo. None of his actions come from bad intentions, but good intentions alone do not always produce good results. Shakespeare may be showing that even wise people can make mistakes, especially when they try to solve large problems with risky solutions. How does Shakespeare use conflict in Romeo and Juliet? Conflict appears everywhere in the play and becomes one of the main forces moving the story forward. The most obvious conflict is between the Montague and Capulet families. Their hatred creates fight, fear, and tension from the very beginning. Tybalt and Mercutio also represent conflict because they often let pride and anger control them. Shakespeare also shows inner conflict inside characters themselves. Juliet struggles between love for Romeo and loyalty to her family. Romeo struggles between his desire for peace and his anger after Mercutio's death. There is also conflict between personal desires and social expectations. These difficult forms of conflict create pressure on the characters and slowly push the story toward tragedy. Discuss the importance of Mercutio in the play. Mercutio is one of the most energetic and memorable characters in the play. He is funny, clever, and full of love. He often jokes and brings humor into the story. His conversations create lighter moments and help balance the serious parts of the play. He also acts as Romeo's close friend and companion. Mercutio becomes extremely important because his death changes the direction of the story. Before his death, the play contains many romantic and humorous moments. After he dies, the mood becomes much darker. Romeo becomes angry and kills Tybalt, leading to his banishment. Mercutio's death acts as a turning point where the story begins moving strongly toward tragedy. Examine the role of family pressure in Romeo and Juliet. Family pressure plays a major role in the lives of Romeo and Juliet. They live in a world where family honor and obedience are considered very important. Juliet's parents expect her to accept their decisions without questioning them. Her father decides she should marry Paris and believes she must obey him. The pressure creates fear and sadness for Juliet because she is already secretly married to Romeo. She feels trapped between loyalty to her family and loyalty to her husband. Romeo and Juliet both want to make their own choices, but family expectations continue standing in their way. Shakespeare shows how pressure from society and family can sometimes make personal happiness difficult. Why is Romeo and Juliet considered both a romance and a tragedy? Romeo and Juliet begins like a romantic story. Two young people meet, fall in love, and dream of spending their lives together. Their conversations are full of emotion and hope. Scenes such as the party where they first meet and the balcony scene create feelings of excitement and happiness. For a while, the story gives the impression that love may overcome every obstacle. However, as the play moves forward, the mood slowly changes. Mercutio dies, Romeo kills Tybalt, Romeo is banished, and problems begin to grow around the lovers. By the end of the story, both Romeo and Juliet lose their lives. Shakespeare starts with romance but slowly turns the story into a tragedy. Love becomes the heart of the story, but tragedy becomes its destination. Discuss the use of symbols and imagery in Romeo and Juliet. Shakespeare uses symbols and imagery throughout the play to create deeper meaning. One important symbol is light and darkness. Romeo often compares Juliet to light, stars, and the sun. Juliet becomes a source of brightness in Romeo's life, almost like a light shining inside a world filled with conflict and sadness. Shakespeare also uses symbols such as stars and fate, poison and medicine, and night and day. Stars often suggest destiny and events beyond human control. Poison appears at the end of the play and brings death, while Friar Lawrence works with healing plants and medicines. Shakespeare seems to suggest that the same thing can help or harm depending on how people use them. Discuss Romeo's impulsive nature and explain how it contributes to the tragedy. Romeo is an emotional person who often acts according to the feelings rather than careful thought. At the beginning of the play, he is deeply upset because Rosalind does not love him, but soon after he completely shifts his attention to Juliet. After meeting Juliet only a few times, he decides to marry her secretly. Romeo often follows his heart immediately without stopping to think about possible results. The impulsive nature becomes one of the major causes of the tragedy. After Mercutio dies, Romeo allows anger to control him and kills Tybalt. Later, when he hears that Juliet has died, he does not wait for more information or search for the truth. He quickly buys poison and decides to end his life. Shakespeare shows that emotions can be powerful and beautiful, but acting without patience can bring painful consequences. How can Romeo and Juliet's love become so strong in such a short time? One of the most debated questions in the play is how Romeo and Juliet fall so deeply in love after meeting only a few times. To many readers, this may seem difficult to believe because deep relationships usually take time to grow. Romeo and Juliet know very little about each other, yet they quickly decide to marry and later become willing to die for one another. Shakespeare may not simply be trying to show ordinary romantic love. He may be showing the intensity of youth and first love. Young people often experience emotions very strongly because everything feels new and powerful. Romeo and Juliet also live in a world filled with hatred, family pressure, and restrictions. Finding someone who truly understands them may have made their feelings grow rapidly. Shakespeare may be suggesting that love is not always measured by time. Sometimes emotions grow faster than reason itself. Why you may like to read Romeo and Juliet? You may like to read Romeo and Juliet because it is much more than a simple love story. At first, it appears to be a story about two young people who meet and fall in love, but slowly it becomes a story about family conflict, choices, fate, anger, and sacrifice. The play keeps changing its mood. One moment there is humor and happiness, and the next moment there is sadness and tension. This keeps the story interesting and makes readers want to know what happens next. Another reason people enjoy reading Romeo and Juliet is because the characters feel real. Romeo is emotional and acts quickly. Juliet grows from a quiet girl into a brave and determined person. Even supporting characters like Mercutio, Tybalt, and Friar Lawrence have important roles and strong personalities. Readers often see parts of themselves in these characters because everyone experiences emotions such as love, anger, fear, confusion, and regret. You may also enjoy reading the play because its ideas still feel relevant today. Even though Shakespeare wrote it hundreds of years ago, people still face family pressure, misunderstandings, conflict, and strong emotions. The setting and language may belong to another time, but the feelings remain familiar. That is why Romeo and Juliet continues to be read and discussed around the world even today. Why you might not like reading Romeo and Juliet? You might not enjoy reading Romeo and Juliet if you prefer realistic relationships and slower character development. Romeo and Juliet meet only a few times, yet they quickly fall in love, secretly marry, and later become willing to die for each other. Some readers find this difficult to believe. They may feel that such strong emotions need more time to develop and may think that the story moves too quickly. Another reason some readers may struggle with the play is the language. Shakespeare wrote Romeo and Juliet hundreds of years ago, and some of the words and expressions can feel unfamiliar. Sentences are often written differently from modern English. Readers who are new to Shakespeare may sometimes spend more time trying to understand the language than enjoying the story itself. Some people may also dislike the amount of tragedy and frustration in the play. Many problems in the story happen because of misunderstandings, rushed decisions, and poor communication. Readers may become frustrated seeing characters make choices that seem avoidable. Some may even feel that Romeo and Juliet could have had a happier ending if people had simply paused, spoken honestly, or thought more carefully before acting. So, this ends my slightly long video on Romeo and Juliet. I hope you found it informative and useful. If yes, please like the video, subscribe to my channel, and click the bell icon so that you get a notification whenever I upload my next video.